The penthouse view of Manhattan was breathtaking, a glittering expanse of ambition and steel, but inside, the air was suffocatingly thin. I watched my wife, Elena, laugh at a joke made by the venture capitalist across the room, a laugh that was too bright, too eager, and entirely devoid of the warmth she once held for me. It wasn't the way she touched his arm that shattered me. It was the way she looked at me afterward, like I was a stain on her perfect silk dress, a mistake she was finally ready to correct. If you find yourself drawn to the jagged edges of broken vows and the cold calculation of revenge, stay with me. The curtain is just rising on this tragedy, and trust me, you won't want to look away. The gala was held at the Pierre, a bastion of old New York money that smelled of lilies and quiet desperation. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto the shoulders of women wearing dresses that cost more than my father had made in a decade. I stood near the periphery of the ballroom, clutching a glass of warm, sparkling water, watching my wife work the room. Elena was radiant. She wore a crimson gown that clung to her silhouette like a second skin, a visual scream for attention amidst the sea of black tuxedos. She was laughing, a practiced, melodic sound, at something a man in a velvet blazer was whispering to her. That man was Julian Thorne. I knew him by reputation before I knew him as the shadow haunting my marriage. Julian was everything I wasn't, a hedge fund shark, aggressive, loud, and brutally wealthy. "Lucas," a voice said beside me. I turned to see Clara, Elena's assistant, looking at me with eyes full of pity I hadn't asked for. "Elena wants you to join them for the photo. The press is here." I nodded, straightening my tie. It was off the rack, a stark contrast to the bespoke Italian wool surrounding me. Of course. Walking across the ballroom floor felt like wading through deep water. As I approached Elena and Julian, the air seemed to grow colder. Elena didn't turn to face me immediately. She finished her sentence, her hand lingering on Julian's forearm for a second longer than social etiquette dictated. It was a small gesture, microscopic to an outsider, but to a husband, it was a siren screaming in the night. "Ah, and here he is," Elena said, finally turning. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. It stopped at her mouth, tight and controlled. "Julian, have you met Lucas, my husband?" The way she said husband sounded like an apology, like a disclaimer attached to a luxury product. Julian turned his gaze on me. It was dismissive, stripping me down to my net worth in a single sweep. He didn't offer a hand. He just swirled his scotch and smirked. "The architect, right? Elena tells me you're working on some personal projects." "I'm drafting a proposal for the city library renovation," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden dryness in my throat. "Quaint," Julian said. He looked back at Elena, effectively erasing me from the conversation. "As I was saying, Elena, the capital injection isn't an issue, but I need a partner who is unencumbered. Someone who can move fast. Relationships, they tend to be dead weight in this market." My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't talking about business. Elena took a sip of her champagne, her eyes locking with his. "I understand, Julian. Sometimes, dead weight needs to be cut loose if the ship is going to sail." I stood there, frozen. The noise of the party faded into a dull roar. They were discussing my disposal right in front of me, veiled in the language of mergers and acquisitions. "Lucas," Elena said, her tone sharp, snapping me back to reality. "Can you go get my clutch from the coat check? I think I left my phone in it." "You have your phone in your hand, Elena," I said quietly. She looked down at the device, then back at me, her expression hardening into annoyance. "Just go check, Lucas, please. Stop embarrassing me." I looked at Julian. He was watching me with the amusement of a predator watching a wounded animal limp away. I looked at my wife, the woman I had shared instant noodles with in a cramped studio apartment just 4 years ago, promising that we would build an empire together. She wasn't that woman anymore, and I was no longer her partner. I was an obstacle. "I'll check," I said. I turned and walked away, weaving through the crowd of laughing strangers. I didn't go to the coat check. I walked straight to the exit, pushing through the heavy revolving doors into the biting cold of the Manhattan night. I looked back through the glass. Elena was leaning in close to Julian, whispering something that made him smile. She didn't look for me. She didn't care if I ever came back. The realization hit me harder than the winter wind. I was already divorced. I just hadn't signed the papers yet. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the granite island in our kitchen, the only light coming from the glow of my laptop screen. The apartment was silent, save for the hum of the refrigerator, a stainless steel monolith we had bought on credit 6 months ago. I wasn't looking at pornography or illicit texts. I was looking at our bank statements. The numbers were stark, black ink on a white background, screaming a truth I had been too blind to see. The joint savings account, the house fund we had contributed to monthly since we were 24, was empty. A transfer of $50,000 had been authorized 3 days ago. Destination: Thorn Capital Ventures. It wasn't just infidelity of the body, it was a liquidation of our history. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had used my sweat and labor to buy her entry ticket into her lover's world. The front door lock clicked at 2:00 a.m. Elena walked in, kicking off her heels near the entryway. She looked exhausted but wired, that specific adrenaline of a night spent chasing power. When she saw me sitting in the dark, she didn't jump. She just sighed, a sound of heavy irritation. "Don't tell me you waited up to sulk," she said, dropping her clutch on the counter. I turned the laptop screen toward her. $50,000, Elena. You emptied the account." She glanced at the screen, her expression unreadable. She walked over to the fridge and pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. "It's an investment, Lucas. Julian's new fund required a minimum buy-in. It was a gesture of good faith. It proves I'm serious about the partnership." "That was for a house," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "That was 4 years of overtime. It was our money." "And now it's working capital," she snapped, slamming the fridge door. "God, you're so small-minded. Do you know what the return on investment will be? In 6 months, I'll put it back, double. I needed this leverage to save the company. I did it for us." "You didn't do it for us," I said, standing up. "You paid him. You paid Julian Thorne for the privilege of sleeping with him." The slap wasn't physical, but the silence that followed stung worse. Elena looked at me with cold, clinical detachment. "I did what I had to do," she said. "I need a partner who understands how the world works, Lucas. Not someone who cries over a savings account while I'm out there trying to build an empire. You're just stagnant." Before I could answer, the front door opened again. It wasn't locked. Julian Thorne walked into my apartment as if he held the deed. He was still wearing his tuxedo minus the tie, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked at me, then at Elena, reading the room instantly. He didn't look apologetic. He looked bored. "I left my scarf in the car, Elle," Julian said, his voice smooth, ignoring my presence entirely. He walked past me, close enough that I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. He went to the counter, picked up the bottle of water Elena had opened, and took a drink. "Get out of my house," I said. Julian chuckled, a low, dry sound. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "Technically, Lucas, considering the mortgage payments Elena has been covering lately while you play artist. Is it really your house?" He looked at Elena. "Is he going to be a problem?" Elena looked down at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. "No, he's just leaving." The betrayal was complete. She wasn't just choosing him. She was letting him humiliate me in the sanctuary of our home. I looked at the woman I had married, realizing she had died a long time ago. The person standing there was a stranger fueled by greed and validation. "You're right," I said, looking at Julian, then at Elena. "I am leaving." I walked past them, toward the bedroom to pack a bag. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a punch. I knew, with a clarity that cut through the pain, that fighting for this, for her, would be the most pathetic thing I could do. They had the money. They had the apartment. But as I walked down the hallway, I realized they had underestimated one thing. A man with nothing left to lose has nothing to fear. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Sterling and Hart's law firm smelled of leather polish and intimidation. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that was currently chewing me up and spitting me out. I sat on one side of the mahogany table. On the other side sat Elena and her attorney, a man named Sterling who wore a suit that cost more than my college tuition. Elena wouldn't look at me. She kept her gaze fixed on the skyline, her fingers tracing the rim of a porcelain coffee cup. She looked impeccable, armored in a sharp white blazer, but there was a tension in her jaw that I knew well. Guilt? No. Impatience. "Mr. Bennett," Sterling began, sliding a thick document across the polished wood. "My client wishes to expedite this process. Given the extenuating circumstances and the disparity in income contribution over the last 24 months, we have prepared a settlement offer." I opened the folder. It wasn't a settlement. It was an eviction notice from my own life. "The terms are simple," Sterling continued, his voice smooth and practiced. "Elena retains the apartment, the vehicle, and the primary investment accounts. In exchange, she agrees to absorb the remaining debt on the credit cards and will not seek legal fees from you. You walk away clean. No alimony, no claims on her future earnings or the company's valuation." I read the legal jargon. One paragraph stood out, phrased in brutal legalese. "The party of the second part, Lucas Bennett, acknowledges having made no significant financial contribution to the acquisition of real property." "No significant contribution," I repeated softly. I looked at Elena. "I drew the blueprints for that apartment. I sanded the floors myself because we couldn't afford contractors. I worked double shifts at the firm to pay the down payment so you could quit your job and start the company." Elena finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the history I was trying to evoke. "That was a long time ago, Lucas. We're talking about now, about reality. You haven't brought in a real paycheck in 2 years. You're a drain on resources." "A drain," I echoed. "Is that what I am?" "Julian thinks." She stopped herself, biting her lip, but the name hung in the air like a foul odor. "Julian thinks I'm cheap to buy off," I finished for her. Sterling cleared his throat, tapping his expensive pen on the table. "Mr. Bennett, if you contest this, we are prepared to depose you regarding your lack of employment stability. It will be public. It will be ugly. And frankly, you cannot afford to fight us. This offer is a mercy." I looked at the pen in his hand. He was right. I had $40 in my wallet and no address to go to tonight. I could fight for half of what we built, drag her through the mud, force her to admit she was an adulterer in court. But looking at her face, cold, distant, impatient to be done with me so she could return to her new life, I realized I didn't want her money. I didn't want anything that had touched her hands. I reached into my messenger bag and pulled out a single black notebook, my sketchbook. It was the only thing I truly owned. "I don't want the money," I said. Sterling blinked, his composure faltering for a microsecond. "I beg your pardon." "I don't want the settlement," I said, picking up the pen. "I don't want the apartment. I don't want a single cent from her." I signed the last page of the document. The scratch of the pen against the paper sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I slid the papers back to Sterling. Then I took the key ring from my pocket, the key to the home I had built, the fob to the building where we had planned a family, and placed it gently on the table. "It's all yours, Elena," I said. "You wanted to reach the top. I hope the view is worth it." I stood up. Elena looked at the keys, then up at me. For a fleeting second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, shame, perhaps, or fear. But she said nothing. She didn't try to stop me. I walked out of the conference room, past the glass walls, past the receptionist who didn't look up. I took the elevator down 45 floors. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the noise of New York rushed in to fill the silence. It was starting to rain, a cold, gray drizzle that soaked through my thin jacket instantly. I had no wife, no home, and no money. I was a ghost in the city I loved. But as I gripped my sketchbook tight against my chest to keep it dry, I felt a strange, terrifying lightness. I was at rock bottom. The only way left to go was up. Time is a cruel sculptor. It chips away at the soft parts of a man until only the granite remains. For the first 6 months after the divorce, I lived in a basement studio in Queens that smelled perpetually of mildew and boiled cabbage. I slept on a mattress, dragging off the street, and ate 1 meal a day. The hunger was a constant, gnawing companion, but it was useful. It kept me awake. It kept me focused. While Elena was likely sipping champagne at charity galas, I was working 18-hour days under the flickering fluorescent light of a borrowed laptop. I wasn't just drawing buildings anymore. I was designing systems. I entered the Al Mirage International Design Competition anonymously, a project seeking a visionary to redefine the skyline of a developing district in Dubai. I poured everything I had lost into that design. The structure wasn't open and inviting. It was a fortress of glass and steel, jagged and beautiful, a monument to resilience. I won. The prize wasn't just money. It was access. A private equity firm in Dubai, impressed by the sheer aggression of the design, offered to fly the mystery architect out. I went. I didn't return to New York for 3 years. In the blistering heat of the desert, Lucas Bennett, the soft-spoken husband, died. In his place rose the silent, partner of Aurora Holdings. I learned that architecture and finance were the same game. Both required structural integrity, and both collapsed if the foundation was rotten. I studied the markets with the same obsession I once had for Renaissance art. I leveraged my initial earnings, took risks that would make a sane man vomit, and multiplied my capital. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, the foundation was indeed rotting. Elena sat in her corner office, staring at a spreadsheet that didn't make sense. Her design firm, Vance Interiors, was supposedly thriving under Julian Thorne's guidance, but the cash flow was erratic. Vendors were calling about late payments. "Julian, she said into her phone, her voice tight. The transfer for the Italian marble shipment didn't go through. The supplier is threatening to hold the cargo. Relax, babe. Julian's voice came through the speaker, dismissive and tinny. It's just a banking delay. International wire transfers are a headache. I'll handle it tomorrow. You said that last week, Elena pressed, rubbing her temples. And I saw the withdrawal from the operating account. What is consulting fee, JT? You pulled out 20 grand yesterday. I'm restructuring the debt, Elena. Don't micromanage me. You do the throw pillows. Let me handle the money. Remember who saved you. The line went dead. Elena looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She looked older. The stress lines around her mouth were deepening. The partnership with Julian had saved the company initially, but now it felt like a noose slowly tightening. She missed the days when she could trust the person sitting across the dinner table. She pushed the thought of Lucas away immediately. He was a failure, a ghost, irrelevant. But the ghost was closer than she thought. 3,000 miles away, in a private jet descending toward Teterboro Airport, I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke charcoal suit. I wasn't coming back as an architect looking for a commission. I opened a dossier on the leather table in front of me. The cover read, Acquisition Target, Vance Interiors and Thorn Capital. My assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah who knew better than to ask about my past, sat across from me. The latest reports indicate Thorn is over-leveraged, Sarah said, tapping her tablet. He's been moving funds between shell companies to hide losses. Elena Vance's company is the collateral. If we move now, we can buy the debt for pennies on the dollar. I looked out the window as the Manhattan skyline came into view. It looked different from up here. Smaller, conquerable. Buy the debt, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. But keep my name off the paperwork. Use the Shell Corporation. I want them to think they're being saved, right up until the moment the trap snaps shut. And the terms? Sarah asked. Total control, I replied. I want 51% of the company, and I want the CEO's authority suspended pending a restructuring review. I watched the city lights approach. I wasn't coming home to reconcile. I was coming to foreclose. The headquarters of Aurora Holdings occupied the top 3 floors of a newly constructed Glass Needle in Hudson Yards. My office was a fortress of silence, insulated from the chaos of the city below by triple-paned glass and acoustic dampening panels. I stood by the window, looking south toward the financial district. My reflection in the glass was a stranger, haircut shorter, suit tailored to the millimeter, eyes hard and devoid of the naive warmth that had defined Lucas Bennett, the struggling architect. They're ready for you, sir. Sarah's voice came through the intercom. I'm not going, I said, pressing the button. Send Graves. Stick to the script. Understood. I turned back to the bank of monitors on my desk. One screen displayed a live feed of the stock market. Another showed the internal financial bleeding of Vance Interiors. It was an autopsy of a company in real time. Across town, in a loft-style office that reeked of panic masked as chic minimalism, Elena Vance was drowning. Elena paced the length of her conference room, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm on the hardwood. Piles of past due notices were scattered across the table like autumn leaves. She dialed Julian's number for the 5th time that hour. Voicemail, she hissed, slamming the phone down. Damn it, Julian. Her partner had been conspicuously absent since the liquidity crisis hit the news. The man who had promised to conquer the world with her was now hiding in the Hamptons, leaving her to face the firing squad of creditors alone. Her assistant, Clara, knocked tentatively on the glass door, She looked terrified. "Ms. Vance, Mr. Graves is here, from Aurora Holdings." Elena smoothed her dress, forcing a mask of composure onto her face. "Send him in." Mr. Graves was a man who looked like he had been manufactured rather than born. He wore a gray suit, rimless glasses, and carried a briefcase that looked heavy with bad news. He didn't smile. He didn't offer pleasantries. He simply sat down and placed a single folder on the table. "Miss Vance," Graves said, his voice dry as parchment. "My employer has reviewed your financials. The situation is terminal." "It's a temporary cash flow issue," Elena lied, lifting her chin. "We have contracts pending. Once the Thorn Capital bridge loan clears..." "Thorn Capital is under investigation by the SEC as of this morning," Graves interrupted. He didn't say it with malice, just facts. "Their assets are frozen. There is no bridge loan. There is no cavalry coming, Ms. Vance." Elena's face drained of color. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The floor seemed to drop out from under her. Julian wasn't just hiding. He was finished, and he was dragging her down with him. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Aurora Holdings is prepared to acquire the debt of Vance Interiors," Graves said. "We will infuse immediate capital to satisfy vendors and prevent bankruptcy." "And in exchange?" 70% equity, full control of the board, and the immediate restructuring of executive leadership." 70%? Elena choked out. That's a hostile takeover. It's my company. I built it." "You built it on sand," Graves replied coolly. "You can keep 30% and your title for now, subject to performance review. Or you can file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy by Friday and lose everything. My employer is indifferent to your choice." He checked his watch. "The offer expires in 1 hour." Elena looked at the folder. She thought of the humiliation of bankruptcy, the headlines, the sneers of her social circle who had just begun to accept her. She thought of Lucas, strangely, and how he had walked away with nothing. She couldn't be like him. She couldn't be a failure. She picked up a pen. Her hand trembled. "Who is he?" she asked. "Your employer. Who is behind Aurora?" "A private party who values privacy above all else," Graves said. "He prefers to let the results speak for themselves." Elena hesitated for a second, a primal instinct warning her that she was signing a deal with the devil. But the fear of poverty was stronger. She signed her name at the bottom of the page. Back in my office, a notification pinged on my screen. Contract signed. I allowed myself a small, humorless smile. She had chosen survival over freedom, just as I predicted. "Welcome aboard, Elena," I said to the empty room. I reached for the phone. It was time to schedule the first board meeting. It was time to introduce the new boss. The monitor on my desk offered a high-definition view of the conference room at Vance Interiors. It was like watching a specimen in a jar. Elena was seated at the head of the table, though the position was purely ceremonial now. She wore a navy power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe, impeccable chignon. To the untrained eye, she looked like a captain steering a ship through a storm. To me, watching the subtle tremors in her hands as she poured water, she looked like a woman realizing the ship was already underwater. Graves sat opposite her, flanked by 2 forensic accountants. "The audit is complete, Ms. Vance," Graves said, his voice tinny through the speakers of my laptop. "The findings are problematic. It appears company funds were used to lease a summer property in the Hamptons, a property listed under Julian Thorne's name." I watched Elena's face on the screen. She didn't flinch. She had always been a master of the pivot. "That was a corporate retreat location," Elena said smoothly, leaning forward, her voice dropping to that husky register she used when she wanted to disarm someone. A necessary expense for client entertainment. Look, Mr. Graves. Arthur. Can I call you Arthur? Graves didn't blink. Mr. Graves is fine. Elena smiled, a tight, predatory expression. Mr. Graves, I understand the numbers look ugly. Julian deceived. All of us. I am as much a victim here as the shareholders. But I know this business. I know the clients. You need me. If you fire me, the brand collapses. She reached across the table, her hand grazing Graves's wrist. It was a calculated move, one she had used on bankers, suppliers, and, shamefully, on me, years ago, when she needed me to sign loan papers. I can make this right. We just need to clear the books. Surely the chairman, whoever he is, understands that talent requires certain allowances. I sat back in my chair, feeling a cold knot of disgust tighten in my stomach. She hadn't changed. Not a single degree. She was still trading on charm, still believing that accountability was for other, lesser people. I pressed the intercom button, speaking directly into Graves's earpiece. Cut her off. Execute the clawback provision. On the screen, Graves pulled his hand away from hers, as if he had touched something hot. He opened a binder. The chairman is not interested in allowances, Ms. Vance. He is interested in solvency. Graves slid a document across the table. This is a liquidation agreement to cover the misappropriated funds and keep Vance Interiors operational under Aurora's umbrella. We require immediate restitution. Elena picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the lines. Her composure cracked. This lists my apartment, my car, the jewelry. You want me to liquidate my personal assets? It's a gap of $4 million, Ms. Vance, Graves said coldly. Either you cover it personally to prove your commitment to the firm, or we terminate your contract for gross negligence and sue you for damages. You will be bankrupt and unemployable by noon tomorrow. Elena stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is extortion. I built this life. You can't ask me to go back to being nothing. You aren't going back to nothing, Graves corrected. You are investing in your future. You stay CEO, you keep the title, the magazine covers, the public face, but the assets go to Aurora to balance the ledger. I watched the war wage behind her eyes. It was the ultimate test. Elena valued how the world saw her more than she valued her own security. She would rather be a destitute CEO than a rich nobody. She looked at the document, then at the window where the city skyline mocked her. If I sign, she whispered, I stay? No scandal? No press release about the embezzlement? If you sign, Graves said, the chairman agrees to keep your name clean. For now. Elena took a gold pen from her purse, probably the last thing she would own by the end of the week, and signed the document. She signed away the penthouse I had designed. She signed away the luxury car she had bought to impress Julian. She stripped herself bare to keep the costume of success. Done, she said, her voice trembling. Now when do I meet him? This chairman. If I'm giving him everything, I deserve to look him in the eye. Graves collected the papers, checking the signature. He looked up, and for the first time, he allowed a small, cryptic smile to touch his lips. He agrees. The final transfer of ownership requires a counter-signature in person. Graves checked his watch. He will see you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Here, don't be late. I turned off the monitor. The screen went black, leaving me with my own reflection. She wanted to look me in the eye. Be careful what you wish for, Elena, I said to the silence. The elevator ride to the penthouse floor of Aurora Holdings was silent and excruciatingly long. Elena checked her reflection in the polished steel doors for the 10th time. She had chosen a white dress today, a subtle psychological ploy to suggest innocence, transparency, a new beginning. But her hands were shaking. The doors slid open, revealing a reception area that looked less like an office and more like a modern art museum. Minimalist, cold, and smelling faintly of ozone and expensive leather. Graves was waiting for her. "He's expecting you," Graves said, gesturing toward the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. Elena took a deep breath, steeling herself. She walked down the corridor, the sound of her heels absorbed by the thick plush carpet. She reached the doors, pushed them open, and stepped into the inner sanctum. The boardroom was vast, dominated by a long table made of black obsidian. At the far end, facing the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the entirety of Manhattan, sat a single high-backed leather chair. The chairman was looking out at the city, his back to her. "Mr. Chairman," Elena said, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "I'm Elena Vance. I wanted to thank you personally for the opportunity to restructure." The figure in the chair didn't move immediately. "Opportunity," a deep voice replied. It was familiar, yet distorted by time and authority. "Is that what we're calling it?" Elena frowned. The cadence of the voice triggered a dormant memory, a ghost of a sound she hadn't heard in years. "I believe we both want Vance Interiors to succeed," she said, taking a tentative step forward. "I'm ready to sign the final transfer of authority." "I know you are," the man said. "You were always very good at transactions, Elena." The chair began to swivel slowly. Elena's breath hitched. As the face of the man came into view, time seemed to warp. The sharp jawline, the intense, brooding eyes, the way his hands rested confidently on the armrests. It was impossible. It was a hallucination born of stress. "Lucas," she whispered. She blinked, waiting for the image to resolve into someone else. But he remained. He was older, his face leaner, hardened by a fire she had never seen before. He wore a suit that she knew, with an expert's eye, cost more than her entire first year's salary. "Hello, Elena," Lucas said. His tone was conversational, terrifyingly polite. "What? What are you doing here?" She let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. "Did they hire you for the renovation? Is that it? You're the architect?" "I am the architect," Lucas agreed. He picked up the fountain pen on the table, a Mont Blanc she recognized. "But I didn't design the building. I designed the deal." He tapped the thick stack of documents in front of him, the documents transferring ownership of her company. You work for Aurora?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I am Aurora," Lucas said. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees buckled, and she had to grab the back of a chair to stay upright. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The mysterious buyer, the aggressive acquisition, the demand for her personal assets. It wasn't business. It was him. "No," she stammered. You were broke. You walked away with nothing." "I walked away with my freedom," Lucas said, standing up. He walked slowly around the table toward her. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "And I learned a valuable lesson from you, Elena. Do you remember what you told me the night you emptied our savings account?" Elena backed away until her back hit the closed door. She couldn't speak. Lucas stopped a few feet from her. "You said you needed a partner who could lift you up, someone who wasn't dead weight. You said the world didn't have room for weakness. He held up the contract, the one she had signed yesterday, giving him her apartment, her car, her life. I took your advice, he said softly. I stopped being weak. I stopped being the husband who waited up for you. I became the man you wanted, the man who owns everything. Lucas, please, Elena choked out, tears finally spilling over. I was foolish. I was manipulated by Julian. I still loved you in my own way. Don't do this. Don't take my company. I'm not taking it, Lucas said, walking back to the head of the table. He sat down and opened the final signature page. I bought it, fair and square. He looked at her one last time, his eyes cold as the winter sky outside. Besides, he added, uncapping the pen, it's not your company anymore. It's an asset, and assets are meant to be managed. He signed his name with a flourish. Lucas Bennett, Chairman. The scratch of the pen was the sound of a guillotine blade falling. The silence in the boardroom was heavy, pressurized, like the air inside a diving bell sunk deep into the ocean. Elena stared at the signature on the document, her eyes wide and glassy. She looked like she was waiting for a blow, a shout, an insult, something human. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. I simply closed the folder. The sound was soft, final. Am I fired? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned back in the leather chair, studying her. Firing her would be mercy. It would allow her to leave, to start over somewhere else, to paint herself as a victim of a corporate raider. I didn't want her to be a victim. I wanted her to be an employee. No, said. You're not fired. Vance Interiors still has value attached to your name for now. You will remain on staff. Hope flickered in her eyes. A pathetic, desperate thing. Thank you, Lucas. I knew you still... You will remain as Vice President of Creative Development, I interrupted. You will vacate the CEO's office by end of day. You will report directly to Mr. Graves. He approves your budgets. He approves your designs. And he approves your expense account. The hope died instantly, replaced by horror. You're demoting me? In my own company? It's not your company, I reminded her gently. And you have a debt to work off. $4 million, Elena. You can start earning it back, paycheck by paycheck. Just like I did. I stood up and walked to the door, opening it for her. It was a dismissal. Elena stood slowly. She smoothed her white dress, but the dignity was gone. She looked at me one last time, searching for the husband who used to make her coffee in the morning, the man who used to hold her when she was afraid. She didn't find him. She only found the chairman. I'm sorry, Lucas, she said, her voice trembling. I know, I replied. So am I. She walked out. I watched her retreat down the long hallway, her figure getting smaller and smaller until the elevator doors swallowed her whole. I was alone. The adrenaline that had sustained me for 3 years began to ebb away, leaving behind a hollow ache in my chest. I walked to the wet bar in the corner of the office and poured a glass of whiskey. I didn't drink it immediately. I held the crystal glass up to the light, watching the amber liquid catch the sun. I had won. I had the penthouse, the millions, the power to make or break careers with a phone call. I had taken the woman who broke me and turned her into a subordinate. It was the perfect architectural blueprint for revenge. Every line was straight. Every angle was sharp. But as I turned to look out the window at the sprawling metropolis of New York, I felt a profound, chilling coldness. Below me, millions of people were rushing home. They were going back to cramped apartments, to arguments about money, to burnt dinners and crying children. They were living messy, imperfect, struggling lives, but they were going home to someone. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The man staring back was impeccable, successful, invincible, and utterly alone. I had built a fortress to keep out the pain, but I had locked myself inside. I took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, but not enough to warm me. The sun began to set, painting the city in hues of bruised purple and bleeding orange. The lights of the skyscrapers flickered on, one by one, a sea of artificial stars. I was the king of this concrete jungle, ruling over a kingdom of glass and shadows. I placed my hand against the cold window pane. "This is what you wanted," I whispered to the empty room. I turned off the lights, leaving myself in the dark, watching the city glitter below like a beautiful broken promise